The moment Matt ended the relationship wasn't just a breakup. It was the emotional collapse Jasmine never believed would actually happen. One second, they were two exhausted new parents trying to keep themselves and their newborn afloat, and the next, Matt's calm but final words shattered the fragile world Jasmine had been clinging to. No screaming, no dramatic exit, just a quiet, steady tone that hit harder than any argument ever could. For Jasmine, that silence was the real explosion. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to understand everything she carried into it. The pressure of new parenthood wasn't just sleepless nights or the fear of getting things wrong. It resurfaced every old insecurity she thought she had buried. The fear of abandonment, the trauma from past relationships, the belief that love always breaks when she needs it the most. Matt had been the one person she trusted to stand firm when her world shook. So when he said he couldn't do this anymore, Jasmine didn't hear a breakup. She heard confirmation of her deepest fear, that she is too much to love and too broken to keep. The reveal didn't stop there. As Matt spoke, Jasmine realized this moment had been building quietly behind her back. In the tension he stopped addressing, in the conversations he avoided, in the way he started looking tired, even when he hadn't said a word. Something else was influencing him, something beyond the normal struggles of two overwhelmed parents. And then the leak happened. A private interview, one Jasmine never wanted public, had resurfaced online hours before their final argument. An interview where she spoke openly about her doubts, her postpartum fears, and her worries that Matt's family thought she wasn't good enough. When Matt saw it, something in him shifted. Not anger, but a kind of resignation. As if he finally accepted a truth he had been trying desperately to push away. Now, as she stood in front of him, Jasmine could feel his family's fingerprints all over the moment, not because they disliked her outright, but because they never fully trusted her. Mild comments, subtle disagreements, concerns, delivered as advice, all of it added pressure to a relationship already bending under the weight of new responsibility. Jasmine had felt it for months, but Matt had always defended her. Until now, this wasn't just the breaking point of a couple. It was the collision of old fears, new responsibilities, and quiet influences no one wanted to acknowledge. And as Jasmine tried to understand whether Matt was acting from exhaustion, fear, or outside pressure, one terrifying question hung between them. Did he give up on her? Or had someone convinced him she was already gone? Long before the breakup, long before the moment Matt finally said the words that split their world in two, the distance had already begun to grow. Not in loud arguments or visible hostility, but in the small, quiet ways people start slipping away without realizing it. This wasn't a sudden explosion. It was erosion. Slow, subtle, and almost invisible until it wasn't. In the early weeks after Matilda's birth, Matt tried to be everything at once. A calm partner, a present father, a dependable provider. But the pressure didn't just sit on his shoulders, it pressed into him. He carried fatigue differently than Jasmine. She broke down, cried, expressed fear openly. But Matt swallowed his emotions, believing that being strong meant staying silent. Every time he dismissed his own exhaustion with, "I'm fine," another piece of him drifted inward, away from her. And Jasmine felt it. Not at first. In the beginning, she interpreted his silence as focus. A man adapting to fatherhood. But then she started noticing the micro changes. The way he lingered a little longer in the hallway before entering the bedroom. The way he flinched ever so slightly when she tried to talk about her postpartum emotions. The way his eyes looked past her instead of at her. Each moment tiny, forgettable on its own. But together, they formed a pattern she couldn't ignore. Jasmine wasn't imagining it. She was sensing it. Still, she didn't confront him. She told herself he was stressed, overwhelmed, adjusting. She convinced herself that love, as strong as theirs, could absorb the tension. But deep down, she felt cracks forming in places she didn't want to look. Matt, meanwhile, found himself trapped between responsibility and fear. After Matilda's birth, he felt a new kind of pressure. Not the fear of losing Jasmine, but the fear of failing her. Every moment he couldn't fix, every tear he couldn't stop, every insecurity Jasmine voiced made him feel more powerless. He wanted to help her, but he didn't know how. And instead of asking for guidance, he retreated. Slowly, quietly, emotionally. The worst part? They were both hurting, in totally different ways. Jasmine started feeling like she was reaching for someone who was standing right next to her, but emotionally miles away. She sensed the resentment building in him, not toward her, but toward the situation. The sleepless nights, the constant pressure, the fear of not being enough. But the more she tried to pull him close, the more he silently pushed back. And that pushed Jasmine into her own spiral. She started second-guessing herself, questioning whether she was too demanding, too emotional, too much during postpartum recovery. She hid certain fears, softened her tone, avoided confrontation, all in an attempt to stop whatever was slipping through her fingers. She thought she was protecting him. She didn't realize she was removing the one outlet where they could have healed together. Quiet resentments began to bloom on both sides. Matt resented that he couldn't be the perfect partner Jasmine needed. Jasmine resented feeling like she had to shrink herself emotionally so she wouldn't overwhelm him. Both resented the silence growing between them, but neither knew how to break it. The emotional drift was never about one explosive moment. It was the buildup of too many unspoken ones. And yet, everything might have remained salvageable. The distance, the tension, the fear. If not for the one phrase Matt finally said. The phrase that stopped Jasmine cold. The phrase that changed the trajectory of everything that came next. A phrase she would replay in her head over and over, wondering whether he meant it or whether someone else had planted the seed. And that phrase? It wasn't, "I'm done." It wasn't, "This isn't working." It was something far more devastating and far more revealing. The moment Jasmine learned about the expiration date comment, something inside her snapped. Not in anger, but in disbelief so deep it felt like the ground under her had tilted. It wasn't even Matt who told her directly. The words reached her through someone else, leaking into her life like poison slipping under a closed door. And once she heard them, she couldn't unhear them. He said your relationship had an expiration date. The phrase didn't just hurt, it detonated. It struck at the very core of Jasmine's deepest fear, that she was temporary, replaceable, and never truly chosen. After everything they had been through, after building a home and creating a family, the idea that Matt had quietly been imagining an endpoint was nothing short of emotional devastation. At first, Jasmine didn't believe it. She refused to. She told herself it was a misunderstanding, a misquote, an exaggeration by someone stirring drama. But the problem wasn't the leak. It was the look in Matt's eyes when she asked him. A flicker, a pause, a silence that lasted one breath too long. That silence told her everything. From that moment on, the comment became the lens through which she interpreted every tiny interaction. The ripple effect was immediate and suffocating. Every time Matt hesitated to answer a question, she wondered if he was mentally checking the calendar of their relationship. Every time he seemed tired or withdrawn, she wondered if he had already emotionally disconnected. Every time he held Matilda and looked away, she questioned whether he saw a future or an obligation. What hurt the most wasn't just the phrase itself. It was the possibility that he had thought it long before he said it. Daily life turned tense and fragile. Conversations became short, clipped, careful. Jasmine tried to keep calm, tried not to react emotionally, but her mind kept spiraling. Was he planning to leave after a certain point? Was I living on borrowed time in my own home? Did he ever really believe in us? For Matt, the shift was subtle but unmistakable. He sensed her change. The stiffness in her voice, the hesitations, the way she watched him like she was trying to detect truth in his breathing. Instead of reaching for her, he withdrew even further, believing that giving her space would calm things down. Instead, the space turned into a canyon. And then came the silence. Not the everyday silence of routine or tiredness. This was the kind that echoed. The kind that made Jasmine feel like she couldn't reach him no matter what she said. The kind that made Matt feel like anything he said would make things worse. Trust didn't crack that week. It shifted. It rearranged itself into something brittle and breakable. Something that couldn't hold the weight of their shared life without creaking. And the worst part? The expiration date comment wasn't even the end of the storm. It was the beginning. Because now Jasmine needed answers, and Matt wasn't ready to face the confrontation she was preparing for. Their unspoken war was taking shape. And neither one knew how close they were to the moment that would change everything again. The confrontation that followed would expose truths both of them had been avoiding, and silence neither of them expected. New parenthood has a way of magnifying everything. Every insecurity, every unspoken fear, every emotional bruise that never fully healed. For Jasmine and Matt, the pressure didn't just sit on the surface of their relationship. It pushed into the deepest, most vulnerable parts of who they were. And the cracks that had quietly formed over months now widened under the weight of responsibility, exhaustion, and fear. For Jasmine, becoming a mother wasn't just a life event. It was a reckoning with her past. Every moment holding Matilda brought overwhelming love, but also a sharp, silent fear. What if I fail her the way I was failed? What if history repeats itself? She had spent her entire life fighting against the patterns she inherited, desperate to build a home that didn't resemble her childhood. And when she sensed Matt pulling away, even slightly, it triggered old wounds she thought she had outgrown. To her, every emotional distance felt like danger. Every silence felt like abandonment. Every sigh felt like a warning. She wasn't simply reacting to present problems. She was reacting to the ghosts of her past. And that made everything feel bigger, scarier, and more urgent than Matt realized. Matt, meanwhile, was dealing with pressure he didn't know how to explain. New fatherhood overwhelmed him in a way he hadn't expected. He wanted to be calm, steady, dependable. He thought shutting down his emotions was the responsible thing, the man thing. He was taught to contain stress, not express it. But that containment had a cost. Whenever situations grew tense, whenever Jasmine cried, whenever the blame felt unspoken but present, Matt's instinct wasn't to confront. It was to shut down. He'd go quiet, withdraw, fold into himself. Not out of cruelty, but out of confusion, out of fear of making things worse, out of fear of failing. The more stressed he felt, the more silent he became. The more silent he became, the more abandoned Jasmine felt. And the more abandoned she felt, the more pressure she put on herself to keep everything together, alone. What neither of them understood was that they were both drowning, just in opposite directions. Jasmine drowned in her fear of losing the family she finally built. Matt drowned in the weight of trying to hold up a family he didn't feel emotionally equipped to lead. Both were struggling. Neither felt safe enough to say it, and in the middle of that emotional chaos sat Matilda, the child they loved more than anything, but whose arrival intensified every insecurity they tried to hide. Unspoken resentments began weaving themselves into everyday life. Jasmine resented feeling like a single parent while Matt was right there. Matt resented feeling like nothing he did would ever be enough. Neither resentment was fair, and neither was entirely false. And hanging over them was the impending confrontation. The one Jasmine was preparing for. The one Matt was avoiding. The one guaranteed to either break the silence or shatter the relationship completely. Because truth was coming. And both of them knew it. What neither knew was how much would be revealed once the confrontation finally happened. And how much of their hidden fear would come spilling out with it. Long before the breakup, before the expiration date shock, and the emotional drift, there was another pressure quietly shaping everything. The weight of Matt's family. Not loudly, not aggressively, but in subtle, pointed ways that seeped into the relationship without either of them fully confronting it. For Jasmine, family has always been a raw, open wound. She came into this relationship hoping to finally belong, to be embraced, to be supported as she built her new life. Instead, she often felt like she was standing on the outside of a window, watching a world she was never fully invited into. And the uncomfortable truth is that Matt's family never quite saw her the way she hoped they would. It wasn't that they openly rejected her. It was the little remarks, the jokes with too much truth buried beneath, the comments about her past, her temperament, her independence, questions phrased politely but aimed sharply. Matt, wanting to keep the peace, never pushed back hard. And that silence, it spoke louder than he realized. Those moments chipped away at Jasmine's sense of belonging. Every time she heard, "She's a lot to handle," or "Matt deserves stability," or the worst, "She might not be the right long-term fit," she felt herself shrink a little. These weren't random opinions, they became quiet influences shaping Matt's mindset during the toughest stretches of new parenthood. And then came the hardest moment, the one that truly shook her. The moment she learned that someone in Matt's inner circle had been subtly suggesting, subtly hinting, subtly pushing the idea of another woman toward him. A woman they preferred. A woman they thought would fit easier into the family dynamic. A woman who didn't have Jasmine's fire, complexity, or history. When Jasmine heard this, it wasn't just jealousy that hit her. It was dread. It was confirmation of her deepest insecurity, that she was never really accepted, that her seat at the table was always temporary, that someone else had already been pre-approved as the better option. She confronted Matt with trembling hands and a breaking voice, and he froze. Not because it was true in the way she feared, but because he hesitated, and that hesitation destroyed her. He didn't deny it quickly enough. He didn't soothe her fast enough. He didn't recognize how much that single hesitation validated every fear she'd spent years trying to bury. From that moment forward, every interaction with his family felt loaded. Every visit, every call, every message suddenly carried an edge. Jasmine felt watched, judged, weighed, and always compared to an invisible shadow she couldn't compete with. And Matt? He felt torn. Between the woman he loved and the family he didn't want to disappoint. Between defending Jasmine and keeping peace. Between choosing his relationship and avoiding conflict. It was a pressure he didn't know how to navigate, so he avoided navigating it at all. What Jasmine didn't know, however, was that this wasn't the end of the family influence. There were messages she hadn't seen, comments she hadn't heard, and conversations she sensed existed but could never prove. And as the expiration date storm collided with the hidden pressure of family whispers, Jasmine began to believe, truly believe, that there were secrets sitting on Matt's phone and in his private conversations that could change everything. After the family revelations and the expiration date comment, the real danger wasn't loud arguments. It was the quiet. The silence that settled over the house like a fog neither could escape. At first, these moments seemed harmless. Jasmine would ask a question and Matt would shrug or nod without really engaging. He'd retreat into his phone, into work, into anything that let him avoid feeling the pressure. And she would sit there, heart racing, waiting for a connection that never came. The problem wasn't the absence of words. It was the absence of meaningful words. Every unspoken thought became a brick in a wall between them. Every withheld feeling, every pause, every look that went unanswered added weight. Over time, it was impossible to remember what they had once shared freely. Jasmine started reading signals everywhere. A short sigh from Matt could mean frustration. A glance away could mean boredom. A quiet moment could mean he was planning an exit in his mind. Every assumption twisted into confirmation of fear. Matt, on the other hand, was trapped in a feedback loop of his own. He felt pressure everywhere. From family, from Jasmine, from himself. He thought silence would protect him, shield him from conflict, or give him space to breathe. Instead, it pushed Jasmine further away, making him feel guilty, cornered, and increasingly ineffective. They began missing emotional cues that were once second nature. Jasmine's small gestures of love were overlooked. Matt's subtle hints at needing reassurance went unanswered. Misunderstandings multiplied. A forgotten chore, a missed word of encouragement, a delayed text, each became proof of the distance growing between them. The house, which once echoed with laughter and conversation, became a space of coexisting emptiness. They were together physically, but the emotional intimacy that had kept them tethered was gone. Dinner conversations shortened, glances were avoided, and even moments with Matilda became tense. Jasmine longed for connection, and Matt longed for relief from the pressure, yet neither could bridge the gap. Old patterns resurfaced too. Jasmine's fear of being abandoned amplified every minor withdrawal. Matt's instinct to suppress feelings and avoid confrontation kicked in stronger than ever. Their past wounds replayed silently, fueling present distance. Neither could remember how to break the cycle. Even when they tried, words stumbled. Apologies came too late, clarifications got lost in timing, and intentions were misread. Silence became the default, and the default became unbearable. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper, "We are alone," even when together. By the end of each day, both felt exhausted and hollow. They were under the same roof, but worlds apart emotionally. The love that once bound them wasn't gone, but it was trapped behind walls built in silence, growing higher with every unanswered glance and avoided conversation. The tension had become almost tangible, like a storm hanging over their heads, and everyone watching knew it was only a matter of time before the dam would break. The resort was meant to be an escape, a chance for Jasmine and Matt to reconnect after months of tension. Instead, it became the stage for the collapse everyone had been bracing for. As cameras rolled, the cracks that had been forming for months widened in real time. The argument started small, a disagreement over a simple daily plan. But in moments like these, small things carried years of unspoken frustration. Jasmine's voice trembled, a mixture of fear, hurt, and pent-up anger. Every word she spoke was loaded with past pain, the insecurities she had carried for years, the anxiety that she might be unloved, the fear that her daughter's future could be unstable. Matt's reactions were subtle but telling. Instead of meeting her intensity with words, he pulled back. His body language shifted, arms crossed, eyes avoiding hers. He tried to stay calm, but the tension radiated off him. Every pause he took, every sigh, every quiet moment of withdrawal only fueled Jasmine's emotional storm. The confrontation revealed patterns long buried. Jasmine pressed for answers, seeking reassurance and clarity, trying to bridge the gap that had grown silently. Matt, overwhelmed by pressure and unable to navigate the torrent of emotions, retreated into silence. His withdrawal became a mirror for Jasmine's deepest fears, that he didn't see her, that he didn't care, that their love had an expiration date she hadn't been told but could feel in every interaction. Old triggers resurfaced. Jasmine's fear of rejection collided with Matt's fear of failure. Every accusation she made, every question about his priorities, brought out his defensive mechanisms. He offered explanations, sometimes fragmented, sometimes stilted, never fully bridging the gap between what he felt and what she needed. The conversation spiraled, revealing layers of insecurity. Jasmine's grief over her unmet emotional needs clashed with Matt's guilt over not being able to provide reassurance the way she wanted. The argument wasn't about the day's disagreement. It was about years of quiet resentments, miscommunications, and unmet expectations. Moments of vulnerability emerged amid the tension. Jasmine's eyes welled up, showing the raw fear and heartbreak she had carried alone for months. Matt's pauses hinted at regret, at awareness of how far things had slipped. But words failed him when they were needed most. Both were trapped in the same storm, emotionally exposed, yet unable to reach each other. As the confrontation ended, silence fell heavier than any argument could. The cameras captured what was said, but the real story lingered in what remained unsaid. The unspoken words, the quiet fears, the unresolved questions, they hung in the air, a reminder that this argument wasn't an isolated incident, but a culmination of months of emotional erosion. By the time they left the resort, both were changed, the tension palpable, and everyone watching could sense that what happened on camera was only the beginning. The real fallout was waiting just beyond the lens. Then it happened. The interview dropped. Matt's words, carefully edited but brutally clear, were out in the open. Lines that once might have been private reflections now became public, and each one landed on Jasmine like a punch she wasn't ready for. The phrases she had feared for months, the suspicions she had whispered to herself in quiet moments, were finally confirmed. Reading his words, Jasmine felt the floor shift beneath her. It wasn't the criticism alone. It was the way he seemed emotionally distant, even in his own recounting. The subtle hints that she had been struggling alone, that he had been quietly checking out, that their relationship was not what she had hoped, all laid bare in print. Every line echoed the unspoken tension she had been living with, crystallizing it into undeniable reality. Her grief wasn't dramatic or explosive at first. It crept in quietly, the kind of despair that builds as the mind replays every failed conversation, every silence, every small dismissal over months. Watching Matt talk about them, describing challenges in ways that made her feel invisible, triggered months of accumulated heartbreak. The walls she had built to protect herself slowly crumbled under the weight of confirmation. Meanwhile, Matt's behavior off-camera amplified the pain. His silence, once a confusing retreat, now felt deliberate, like a physical confirmation of everything she had feared. He was emotionally absent at the exact time she needed him most, and the public words made it feel even more real. Jasmine couldn't shake the thought that the man she loved was slowly stepping out of their shared life while the world watched. The timing couldn't have been worse. Postpartum pressures, sleepless nights with Matilda, and the constant effort to hold the family together left Jasmine raw, exposed, and vulnerable. Every day became a test of emotional stamina, each interaction with Matt tinged with anxiety, wondering if he truly cared, or if his words in that interview were the final confirmation of their unraveling. Even small, everyday moments became loaded with tension. A missed smile, a delayed response, a glance that lingered too long or not enough. Each one felt like proof that the love she counted on was fraying. The world seemed to shrink down to the small apartment, the quiet cries of Matilda, and the echo of Matt's interview words repeating in her mind. By the end of that week, Jasmine was barely recognizable to anyone who knew her. She moved through the house quietly, carefully, as if the emotional weight could be contained by sheer will alone. But the collapse had begun. It was subtle, invisible to outsiders, but anyone paying attention could see the storm in her eyes, the tension in her voice, the fatigue that no sleep could fix. The apartment was quiet, but the silence was deafening. Jasmine moved through the rooms like a shadow, each step heavy with the weight of shock and disbelief. Matt's interview had confirmed what she had been sensing for months, and now that confirmation sank in fully. The man she had trusted, the father of her child, seemed to be slipping away in ways she couldn't reach. Every small action now carried meaning. A missed glance, a neutral tone in his voice, a delay in responding to Matilda's needs. Each one felt like evidence of emotional abandonment. Jasmine felt the world closing in, the apartment shrinking around her hands full with a baby who needed her whole heart, yet couldn't fill the void left by Matt. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by an endless loop of fears. What if he left entirely? What if her daughter grew up with an absent father? What if the stability she fought so hard to create crumbled completely? Matt, for his part, withdrew further. Conversations became minimal, gestures routine and mechanical. He didn't yell, he didn't argue, he didn't engage. He simply receded, emotionally and physically. His silence was heavy, almost suffocating, as though any attempt at closeness would ignite the very collapse he had been avoiding. Jasmine interpreted every retreat as a personal rejection, while Matt felt trapped in a cycle of pressure and expectation he couldn't meet. Their routines fractured. Meals were eaten separately. Chores became solitary tasks. Even playtime with Matilda carried an undercurrent of tension. The laughter that once filled the apartment now seemed fragile, a thin mask covering the growing chasm between them. Each day passed with careful avoidance. But avoidance didn't erase the truths they both faced. Jasmine's mind replayed the interview constantly. Every word, every tone, every carefully chosen phrase haunted her. She questioned herself. Had she missed the signs? Could she have changed anything? Was this just the inevitable fallout of mismatched emotional needs? And beneath all of that was the fear of losing the life she had built. The home, the daughter, the sense of family she had tried so hard to protect. Matt's silence, though, left a new question hanging in the air. How far would this withdrawal go? The emotional distance was no longer temporary. It had begun to shape their future, influencing decisions, trust, and even the way they navigated parenthood together. Each moment apart added weight, making reconciliation feel increasingly distant. And quietly, in the background, a new shadow appeared. Custody considerations began to creep into their thoughts. Neither spoke openly about it, but the awareness lingered, subtle yet undeniable, adding another layer of stress. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer just about two people struggling to connect. It was about protecting a child, safeguarding stability, and grappling with the reality that love alone might not be enough. The storm had not passed. It was only settling into a tense, fragile quiet before the next upheaval. And the choices they would make in the days ahead could change everything. The days following the silence felt endless. Jasmine carried Matilda through a world that suddenly felt smaller and colder. Every sound, every glance from Matt carried unspoken tension. The breakup wasn't just a moment anymore. It had stretched into a living, breathing presence in their home. Every routine, every decision, every smile from her daughter became layered with a subtle panic. How much longer before everything she built fell apart? Matt's emotional withdrawal reached its peak. He was present physically, but absent in every other way. Diapers, bottles, and daily routines were completed, but the warmth, reassurance, and emotional partnership that Jasmine needed had disappeared. Each interaction became transactional. He did what was expected, but without connection. For Jasmine, this absence wasn't neutrality, it was a confirmation of the fear she had long carried. She began replaying past interactions, searching for moments she could have saved, words she should have said, gestures she should have made. At the same time, Matt was wrestling privately with pressure and guilt. Fatherhood had arrived suddenly, magnified by public attention and family expectations. Every attempt to reach Jasmine felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon of old resentment and unspoken disappointments. Instead of confronting these feelings, he retreated further, believing distance would somehow keep the situation under control. The quiet between them started shaping reality. Shared spaces felt like minefields. Conversations were brief and loaded, each statement double-checked. Jasmine began noticing patterns she hadn't before. The slight sighs, the way he avoided eye contact, the subtle tension in routine chores. Every observation fed the growing narrative in her mind that the relationship had already ended emotionally, even if not officially. Then came the custody whispers. Though unspoken, the possibility of legal intervention hovered over every decision. Suddenly, interactions with Matilda were not just about love and care. They were strategic. Jasmine felt the urgency of protecting her child's world, while Matt remained emotionally locked, unsure how much of himself he could give without shattering the fragile balance. Yet, in the midst of all this, small moments of clarity emerged. A laugh from Matilda, a shared glance across the room, a fleeting acknowledgement. These glimpses reminded Jasmine of what had been and what she still feared losing. Every small interaction became a test of patience, endurance, and emotional resilience. The home was no longer just a place to live. It was a stage where unresolved fears and suppressed needs played out silently but powerfully. Jasmine realized that the collapse had been years in the making. This wasn't about a single fight, a single comment, or a single mistake. It was about accumulated pressure, unspoken trauma, incompatible emotional languages, and a fear of being unseen and unloved. The expiration date comment, the interview leak, the family pressures, all these pieces converged to create an emotional implosion that neither could fully contain. The days that followed were uncertain, tense, and fragile. Both were forced to confront their limitations, their fears, and the reality that love alone couldn't bridge gaps they hadn't learned to communicate across. The next choices would define not just their relationship, but the environment in which Matilda would grow and the emotional legacies they would leave behind. And as the world outside watched, the real question hung in the air. Could they salvage any of what they had? Or was the quiet between them already the beginning of the end?